are going to talk about the tea to butter method. No, it is not a recipe for your 5 o'clock tea. If you learn how to do this, you will be able to paint anything you want, no matter how hard it is. Today I'm going to show you exactly how to master water to paint ratio. It is quintessential 101 watercolor for beginners. In watercolor, you don't paint with paint, you paint with water, right? The amount of water you use is what determines pretty much everything, but it's also a little bit hard to master, and this is the big problem. There's actually more elements to this. It is tea, coffee, milk, cream, and butter. So the tea to butter method is all about watercolor paint consistency. It's how you can easily describe how much water you've added to how much paint and how thick or how watery your paint is. And why tea to butter? Let me show you. It actually makes perfect sense. A lot of people think this is about value or opacity or vibrancy. That's not what we're doing here today. The amount of water you mix does affect the value, right? The more water, the lighter the color gets. So I get why this may be confusing, but just keep in mind, we are talking about paint consistency here. That's all there is to it. First step is tea, and this is the one with the most water content, like 90% water to 10% paint. So tea, very high ratio of water, very light value, the paint is very much watered down, just like tea. And a good way that you can see if this is the right consistency is how it moves. Yeah, it needs a little bit more water. This is still a little bit thick. Can you imagine tea? Tea doesn't run like this, right? It's much, much thinner, much, much watery. So just add water. Yeah, I think this is good. Look at that. Yeah, this is pretty thin, I think. Best do another one just for luck. Okay, we are ready to paint. And I'm just going to paint over the square, okay? Because we want to see how transparent this is. And I want you guys to see if all these cover the lines or not. So I'm just gonna do it like this. Look at that. Completely transparent. Lots of water, almost no pigment. This is tea. This is definitely the consistency you want to use on your washes, okay? It just flows really easily. And I have to say, I do not use this one a lot unless I want something almost completely transparent. Like if I'm doing a flower petal that's really light and I want a little bit of a shadow or some highlight. So it makes sense that our next step is coffee. Think about a cup of coffee and a cup of tea. They have quite different consistencies, unless you like your coffee real weak, right? So this is a thickened, more full-bodied consistency that makes all the difference in watercolors. Maybe 70% water, 30% paint. It's still fluid, it still drips if you want it to. You can totally see the line underneath. But you can definitely see more of the paint too, right? Big difference between the two values because there's just more paint in there. I usually use this for my first wash. I want to get some color in there, but nothing too dominant. Coffee is followed by milk, and milk is still totally liquid, but it's a little bit more consistent, right? A little bit thicker. So that's what we're going to do. And you can see how the paint is just moving slower as I mix more paint, right? I would say this is the ratio I use the most, about 50-50. And these are just estimates, okay? When you're trying this, don't focus on the percentages I'm telling you, focus on the consistency you're getting and compare them to the drinks we've talked about. So tea, coffee, and now milk. And this is why the scale works really, really well, because it's totally relatable. You can totally see what we're trying to achieve here. Water control can be one of the hardest things to master when we're learning how to paint with watercolors, and doing this exercise really just helps us learn more about it and make it more natural for us to mix our colors, add that water, and get the best results without stressing about it. And as you can see, you can totally see the paint, and it is now totally covering the paper, but you can still see the line. I should also say that there are many other consistencies in between these 5, okay? But if you've practiced them frequently, just these 5, it will go a long way to help you master water control when mixing your paints. There is a lot of knowledge to be had from this exercise alone, let me tell you. Moving on, we get cream, the heavy stuff, okay? And from here on out, we will be using more paint and water. We have crossed over to the other side, so to speak. And the first thing you will notice is how the paint barely moves on your plate, on your palette. It's thick, filled with pigment, so you will have a complete coverage of the paper and a great color vibrancy. This will easily cover up any previous washes of paint, and we usually use milk and cream to define the shape of what we're painting and create the actual object. you know, the flower petals, the buildings, the lines, whatever we need. I have chosen a darker color so you can easily see the difference in values depending on the water ratio. Don't expect such stark differences if you decide to do this using lighter colors, but I do suggest you do this with lighter colors too to see the effect. And right now we are doing wet on dry, okay? Before we're done, we are going to do wet on wet because you will really see a big difference there. And finally, we have butter. And butter doesn't require any mixing, okay? No water. So if you have a tube, you can take your paint straight out of the tube. And if you have a pan, just use enough water to activate the pan, but not mix it, okay? We want it as thick, as pure as we possibly can. And yeah, for butter consistency, working with tubes is better than pans because the least amount of water used, the better. Because butter is thick, very, very thick. This is the definition of dry on dry painting. You don't get a coverage effect at all. It's like the brush is skipping parts of the paper. The more texture the paper, the more you'll see it. This is the thickest watercolor consistency you can paint with. Now, this is usually done with darker paint, but in lighter colors, it can also help to add highlights and details to it. So now it's time to see the real differences because we are going to be doing wet on wet. So I'm just going to wet this page and we are going to use all of these consistencies backwards, okay? From butter to tea and see how they behave on a wet page. It is really, really cool. Now let's just try all of these on wet, and for this we need to go the other way around from butter to tea. Look at how these behave. They are definitely different, right? We're looking to see how they diffuse and if they spread a lot. Just keep in mind that not all colors behave the same with wet on wet, and we have seen that in some of my previous videos, so take that under consideration, okay? And try different colors to find out how they behave. Now, I like to think I do this for, you know, serious reasons, but it's just so much fun. I mean, look at this, how cute and weird these shapes are. It's like one of those psychological tests. I love it. Okay guys, so this is what we get with wet on wet. You can definitely see that butter is a little bit more restrained. It doesn't, you know, blow up as much. And for tea, you know, you could say this is the most restrained, but it's actually not. It just doesn't have enough paint to go anywhere. So all you have is water, okay? This is the only pigment you have, and the rest is just water. That's why you can't see much of the expansion. It doesn't blow up a lot. But, you know, coffee, for me, my absolute best. This looks like a tornado, and this looks like somebody took an X-ray of their neck and their chest, and this is the little head. I mean, you never know what you're going to get, and I just love making this exercise because the paint and the water, of course, really do take a life of their own and just do their own thing. And I think this is gorgeous. Have you ever done this exercise before? Is this how it's supposed to look, or am I doing something wrong? Please let me know in the comments. I hope this helped. This was such an important video. Thank you for doing this with me, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye!